Danair Flight 1008 was one of the deadliest aviation disasters in Spanish history and remains a haunting example of how a combination of navigation confusion, communication breakdown, terrain danger, and human factors can destroy a routine passenger flight in only a few minutes. The accident happened on April 25, 1980, on the island of Tenerife in the Canary Islands, a place already associated with tragedy because of the catastrophic 1977 runway collision at Los Rodeos Airport. 3 years later, another aircraft would be lost there, this time not on the runway, but in the mountains that surrounded the island. All 146 people on board were killed when the aircraft slammed into high ground during its approach. The victims included tourists looking forward to sunshine holidays, crew members performing a normal duty, and families who never imagined their trip would end in disaster. The story of Flight 1008 is one of ordinary travel suddenly overtaken by irreversible error. Danair was a British airline that had become well known for charter operations, carrying large numbers of holidaymakers from the United Kingdom to Mediterranean and island destinations. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, package tourism was booming. British families increasingly booked vacations through tour operators, and airlines like Danair played a major role in making those holidays possible. The company operated a mixed fleet of aircraft, including Boeing 727s, which were common tri-jet airliners of the era. The Boeing 727 was considered reliable, rugged, and capable of operating into many airports around the world. It had 3 engines, a T-tail, and performance suited to medium-haul routes. For passengers, it was a familiar sight. For crews, it was a respected machine. Flight 1008 was a charter service from Manchester, England, to Tenerife in Spain's Canary Islands. On board were 138 passengers and 8 crew members, making a total of 146 people. Many passengers were holiday travelers, excited for warm weather, beaches, and a break from everyday life. The Canary Islands had become a popular destination for British tourists because of their mild climate and resorts. Tenerife especially attracted huge numbers of visitors. The journey from Manchester would have felt like the beginning of vacation, with passengers chatting, reading, perhaps ordering drinks, and anticipating arrival. The aircraft assigned to the route was a Boeing 727-46 registered GBDAN. It had accumulated years of service and was part of Danair's active fleet. The crew was experienced. The captain had thousands of flight hours, and the first officer and flight engineer were also qualified professionals. Nothing at departure suggested that the flight would become a disaster. Weather en route was generally manageable, and the aircraft itself was functioning normally. There was no major mechanical failure that doomed the flight. Instead, what would happen later was rooted in situational misunderstanding during the final phase of flight. To understand the crash, it is important to understand Tenerife itself. The island is mountainous, with steep terrain rising dramatically inland. Airports in such areas require careful navigation because high ground may lie close to arrival paths. At the time, Tenerife's airport system and air traffic procedures could be challenging, especially for crews unfamiliar with local peculiarities. Los Rodeos Airport, now Tenerife North Airport, sat at elevation and had a history of weather complications, including fog and cloud. Surrounding terrain meant there was little room for error if an aircraft deviated from the correct approach pattern. As Flight 1008 neared Tenerife, the crew began descent preparations. They were under the control of Spanish air traffic services. Communication between pilots and controllers was conducted in English, but accented speech, phraseology differences, and radio quality could all complicate understanding. In modern aviation, standardized communication is drilled constantly, but even today misunderstandings happen. In 1980, such issues could be more pronounced. The intended arrival involved positioning the aircraft for an instrument approach to the airport. Controllers issued instructions related to headings and holding or approach routing. At some point during these exchanges, confusion emerged regarding where the aircraft should turn and what track it should follow before final approach. The crew believed they had been cleared in a way that allowed a turn sooner than was safe. The controller, meanwhile, appears to have believed the aircraft would remain on a safer path longer before maneuvering. This difference in understanding was fatal because of the terrain west and south of the airport. If an aircraft turned prematurely while descending, it could be steered directly toward mountains. That is exactly the danger that developed. Flight 1008 descended below safe altitude while not correctly aligned on the protected approach path. Instead of remaining clear of terrain, It moved toward rising ground hidden partly by cloud. Inside the cockpit, workload would have been increasing. Approach is one of the busiest phases of flight. Pilots monitor speed, altitude, navigation instruments, radio calls, descent rate, flap settings, checklists, and weather while preparing to land. If there is any uncertainty about position, workload can become overwhelming quickly. In such moments, small assumptions can become locked in. A crew may believe they are where they expect to be, even when evidence suggests otherwise. This phenomenon, sometimes called expectation bias, has contributed to many aviation accidents. The captain and crew likely believed they were correctly executing the approach. There is no evidence they intentionally ignored danger. Rather, they appear to have misjudged their position relative to the airport and terrain. The instruments available at the time were less advanced than today's cockpit systems. There were no modern moving maps, no terrain display, no GPS with precise real-time location, and no enhanced ground warning system giving aggressive pull-up alerts. Crews relied heavily on radio navigation aids, charts, and procedural discipline. As the Boeing 727 continued descending, the island's mountainous terrain rose ahead. The weather in the area included cloud layers that may have obscured visual contact with the ground. If the mountain was hidden, the crew may have had little visual warning. Controlled flight into terrain, often abbreviated CFIT, is the term used when a fully functioning aircraft under pilot control flies unintentionally into the ground, water, or an obstacle. Flight 1008 became one of the classic CFIT cases. The aircraft was not falling apart. Engines were working. Controls were functioning. But the airplane was in the wrong place. At approximately 5,450 feet on the slopes of Mount La Esperanza, the aircraft struck terrain. The impact was devastating. The Boeing hit the mountainside at high speed, breaking apart violently. Fuel ignited, and wreckage scattered across the area. There were no survivors. The force of collision made rescue impossible for anyone on board. Local emergency responders and authorities were alerted quickly, but the remote and rugged location complicated access. For families waiting in Tenerife or back in the United Kingdom, the hours after disappearance were agonizing. In aviation disasters before the internet age, information moved more slowly. Loved ones often waited by telephones or in airport terminals for news. At first, there may have been hope of emergency landing or communication failure. That hope vanished when wreckage was found on the mountain. Recovery operations were difficult because of the steep terrain and fragmented debris field. Investigators needed to identify victims, gather aircraft components, examine instruments, and reconstruct final moments from evidence. In crashes of this kind, flight recorders are essential. The cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder offered insight into the crew's actions and radio communications. Investigators analyzed exchanges with air traffic control carefully. The official investigation concluded that the immediate cause was the aircraft turning prematurely and descending below minimum safe altitude, placing it on a collision course with terrain. However, accidents are rarely caused by a single act. Contributing factors included ambiguous air traffic instructions, possible misunderstanding between controller and crew, inadequate adherence to instrument approach procedures, and insufficient situational awareness in the cockpit. One important lesson involved phraseology. Air traffic control language must be crystal clear. Any instruction that can be interpreted in two ways is dangerous, especially near mountains. After many accidents worldwide, aviation authorities pushed harder for standardized wording, read-back requirements, and immediate correction of misunderstood transmissions. Flight 1008 reinforced how critical that standardization is. Another lesson involved terrain awareness. At the time, many aircraft lacked sophisticated warning systems. In later years, ground proximity warning systems and then enhanced GPWS/terrain awareness and warning systems became widespread. These systems compare aircraft position and flight path to terrain databases and can warn pilots with urgent commands such as terrain, or pull up. Many CFIT accidents that once would have been fatal are now prevented by such technology. Flight 1008 belongs to the era before those safeguards became universal. Crew resource management was another evolving concept. Modern CRM encourages all cockpit crew members to challenge assumptions, cross-check navigation, speak up assertively, and share workload effectively. In earlier decades, cockpit hierarchy could sometimes discourage questioning decisions. While each case is unique, many investigators after accidents examined whether stronger internal challenge and cross-verification might have broken the chain of error. Danair as an airline suffered reputational damage from several accidents during its history, though it also carried millions of passengers safely over many years. Flight 1008 was among its worst tragedies. For the company, it meant grief, scrutiny, compensation responsibilities, and renewed pressure over operational standards. For crew colleagues, it meant the loss of fellow professionals. For passengers' families, it meant an absence that never healed. In Spain, the crash was another painful aviation memory for Tenerife. The island had already endured the 1977 disaster involving two jumbo jets, the deadliest runway accident in history. Now, once again, the name Tenerife was associated internationally with air tragedy. Yet the causes were different. The 1977 crash centered on runway collision in fog. Danair 1008 centered on terrain impact during approach. The victims came from many walks of life. Some were couples on holiday. Some were groups of friends. Some may have been taking their first trip abroad. Cabin crew members were performing service duties moments earlier, likely preparing the cabin for arrival. In such accidents, the human story is often overshadowed by technical findings, but every seat represented a personal future that ended abruptly. Over time, aviation safety improved through accumulated lessons from tragedies like this one. Better navigation equipment, stricter approach procedures, terrain warning systems, simulator training for non-precision approaches, clearer controller training, and stronger cockpit teamwork standards all helped reduce CFIT accidents worldwide. While crashes still occur, the industry learned deeply from events like Flight 1008. The mountain where the aircraft crashed became, for many, a place of remembrance. Memorials and records preserve the names of those lost. Families often seek not only answers but acknowledgement that their loved ones mattered. Aviation history remembers flight numbers, but families remember birthdays, voices, routines, and plans that were never fulfilled. The story of Danair Flight 1008 is ultimately the story of how normality can collapse in minutes. A routine charter flight departed Manchester carrying holiday makers expecting beaches and sunshine. The airplane was sound. The crew was trained. The destination was close. Yet a mistaken turn, descent below safe altitude, and lack of modern warning technology placed the aircraft in front of a mountain no one on board could escape. In the silence that followed impact, 146 lives were gone. What remained were wreckage, investigation reports, grieving families, and lessons written into the future of aviation safety.